And we have an excellent panel here to discuss this topic. I'm going to go through each panelist and give them a chance to say something to introduce themselves and something on the topic. Let us start with Mike LaChance. He writes for the Legal Insurrection blog. You might have known him previously. He used to write under the name of Alistair at American Glob. And you're also editing another website. What's that other website you're editing?
AmericanLookout.com.
AmericanLookout.com. So, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. First of all, I want to just say thank you to Peter for inviting me to this. As a full-time blogger, I don't get the chance to leave the house very often. So it's good to be out and seeing people. I'm very happy to be here. I'm honored to join such a great panel. And I look forward to answering questions and offering my opinion. Just to give you a little bit of background, since the subject of today is Trump, I'll give you a little bit of background on where I stand on President Trump. Going back to the 2016 Republican primary, during the early days of the primary, I was not Scott Brown. I've got Scott
Walker.
I've got Scott Brown on my mind, Massachusetts. I was a Scott Walker guy, and but at the same time, I felt that I ultimately would support almost anyone who got the Republican nomination, with a couple of exceptions. I was not prepared to back Jeb Bush, who I thought would get creamed. I also felt, as many people in the nation did, that we had had enough President Bushes. And I also wasn't terribly excited about the candidacy of John Kasich, who I also felt would get creamed in the general election. So I wasn't particularly for or against Donald Trump. I mean, I was one of the very few people in the country who was sort of neutral on Trump. But once he became the nominee, I backed him. And in the months between the time when it became apparent that he was going to be the nominee and the election, he really grew on me. And so when Legal Insurrection published a post after the election, sort of weighing in with all the authors to say, where are you on President Trump? I said, in response to so many conservatives who had said that, that they were never Trump, I said that I wanted to launch a hashtag called Fine with Trump, because that's where I was. I was never particularly for or against him, but once he was the nominee, I was fine with him. And once he won, I was much more fine with him. So, at any rate, that's all I have to say for my introduction. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Now, our next member of the panel is Chip Faulkner for Citizens of Limited Taxation, who is a group which, if you are not being taxed to death in Massachusetts, you owe a debt of gratitude towards. You might remember the late Barbara Anderson founded this group. Chip is the head of this group at the moment, and also runs the monthly Friday morning group, I believe it's called, which has some excellent speakers, and I'm not just saying that because I've been a speaker there once or twice myself. Chip, obviously, as Citizens for Limited Taxation, knows a bit about taxes, so Chip, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. I'm actually not the leader of the group. The other Chip Ford is.
I stand corrected.
But I'm the assistant go-around guy, which is why I'm here today. But I'd like to start off by mentioning something that happened last June. I actually went to my Holy Cross 50th reunion in Worcester. And about a month before the reunion, one of my classmates called me and said, we want to have a political forum during reunion weekend, and we're going to have you represent the conservative side. And I said, fine. And your classmate, Chris Matthews, will do the liberal side. Yes, the Chris Matthews. So we go in this forum. I thought there'd be maybe a couple of dozen classmates. There were 400 people that packed this hall to listen to the two of us. It wasn't a debate. It was more or less just coming out with our views and so on. And I started off by, and some of you who know who Chris Matthews is would find this delicious. His most famous line was probably in '08 at election night when he realized Obama was going to be elected. Matthews said a thrill went up and down his leg. And that's probably the first line in his obit. But so when they introduced us, Chris Matthews here, Chip Faulkner, I said, well, I'm glad I'm at this forum, and especially here with Chris Matthews. In fact, as I speak, a thrill is going up and down my leg. The place went nuts laughing. They all know, they're all doing it. But we got to a pretty good discussion, and I pointed out that the Republican Party is so dominant that in 26 states, they have the governorship, the House, and the Senate. The Democrats have 6. In fact, you can go from Key West, Florida, through the United States to the northern tip of Idaho and never leave a state that isn't completely dominated by Republicans. And then I said to the crowd, and who do the Democrats have for leadership? They have Pelosi, they have Schumer, they have Sanders, they have Elizabeth Warren. The average age of those 4 is deceased. And which of course but anyway, and it went on, and it went on very well, and we went back and forth, and it was a very interesting forum. And then thank God we had it last June and not scheduled this spring, because Chris Matthews never would have attended because of obviously the allegations that have been made against him in the last couple of weeks. The other thing I want to point out is somebody asked me at that forum, when did you realize Trump was going to be elected president? And I'll tell you when I realized it. I hang out at a couple of sports pubs in the Attleboro area. And you go to these pubs and you get to know a lot of the regulars. Well, I realized by the end of the summer of 2016, every white male that I was friendly with was for Trump. And it wasn't some of them or most of them, it was all of them. And they were very vocal about it. It wasn't like, oh, gee, I guess I'll vote for it. It was, I'm for Trump 100%. And I must have heard this 50 times. He's saying what I'm thinking. I must have said that 50 times. And that, I think, is what elected him. Now, I just want another minute or two, because I just want to read something that was in the Wall Street Journal the day after Christmas by a Main Street column by a guy named William McGurn. I just like to read this because this capsulizes exactly what Trump has done. This time 1 year ago, the assumption dominating political coverage was that the only people more stupid than Donald Trump were the deplorables who elected him. Since then, of course, President-elect Trump has become President Trump. Over his 11 months in office, he has put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court and 4 times as many judges on the appellate courts as Barack Obama did his first year. Recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, adopted a more resolute policy on Afghanistan than the one he had campaigned on, rolled back the mandate forcing Catholic nuns, among others, to provide employees with contraception and abortion, signed legislation to open up drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, initiated a bold deregulatory assault on the administrative state, and topped it all off with the first major overhaul of the tax code in more than 30 years. And yet, that Mr. Trump is a very stupid man remains the assumption dominating his press coverage.
That says a lot about what people are thinking. Thank you very much, Chip. Now, our next guest should be familiar to any of you who were at our last event. She did an impromptu interview with our main speaker, Robert Stacey McCain. The people are still talking about it. I gotta say, and I gotta give John Weston, who's not here today, some credit for having that idea, because it was absolutely brilliant. She is the Boston chapter president of Act for America, and if I'm not mistaken, the only person at this table who was active in the Trump campaign during the last election cycle. Let me introduce to you Dianna Ploss.
Thank you. So thank you all for being here, because just by being here, you're doing your part. You're doing your part. You're helping save Massachusetts and America. So thank you for having me again. This is great. I was looking forward to this. 1 year ago today, I was in DC, and I do have chills. Right now, I do have chills. 1 year, I was in DC when President Trump got sworn in. And it's been an incredible, incredible year. And yes, I bring President Trump with me everywhere. And in fact, tonight I'm going to Puerto Rico. Not for vacation, but to help some friends down there. And the last time I went through the TSA, which was about 6 weeks ago with President Trump, they gave me a hard time. And I'm still working on my letter because I'm complaining. And I did, of course, post a video on social media. So there's a lot to talk about. And so I am the chapter leader for Act for America, but also the leader for MA for Trump, MA number 4 Trump. And we have our Christmas party on the 28th of this month. If anybody wants information on how to get a ticket, let me know. At the end, I have some flyers that I can hand out. And you'll hear more from me as we proceed.
All right, and Diana's, of course, delayed that Christmas party because she likes to keep Christmas all through the year, as Ebenezer Scrooge once promised. Finally, if you were at our last event, this gentleman would have been behind the camera, but today he is in front of the camera. Let me introduce Christopher Maider from the Meat and Potatoes radio program.
Wow, amazing. Well, obviously some people know me. We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary of broadcasting the Meat and Potato Show. And the 10 years of candidate interviews and many other interviews that I've been doing ad nauseum, and I've forgotten half of what I've done. I've actually had to go back through the archives because throughout the entire year, a lot of programs will do a night of looking back. Well, what we're going to do over the next year, whose phone is that? I can get shut off. What we'll do over the next year, literally, is we're going to be revisiting many of the candidates that were on, past and present, many of the past interviews throughout the entire year. So not only will we be still doing new stuff as the weeks go on throughout the year, we'll be revisiting everybody as kind of like a year-long looking back over the 10 years. It's been a long time. I started as an intern, literally off of a lark, just an invite from a friend to come and sit in at WCW Radio in Worcester, and he quite literally just asked me, he's like, well, I'm gonna go out and have a cigarette. Would you like to spin some records? I was like, okay. I was like, what? I'd never done this before. But that was it. That was the bug, and that was in 2008, and that's what happened. And ever since then, I had the great pleasure of meeting Matt O'Brien, John Nowicki, and Ken Mandiel from Worcester Tea Party. And that's what started the shtick, the whole concept of the Meat and Potato Show, conservative talk and awesome rock. And that's how it all started way back then. And like I said, it's been 10 years. It's been a great ride. It's now gotten to the point where instead of me inviting people onto my show, I have actual people inviting me onto their shows now. And that's kind of the icing on the cake. And so there we are today.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Now, I want to start, and before I start my questioning, I want to remind everyone that there are pens and paper available, so if you have questions that you want me to ask, write them down, pass them to Matt, and he will pass them to me, and we'll have a segment where I ask your questions of the panel. But I want to start, since we already heard from you, Mike, that you were supporting the Wisconsin Governor, Scott Walker, and obviously you were supporting Trump as Massachusetts for Trump. Chris, who were you supporting in the primaries?
All the way.
You were Trump all the way as well.
All the way.
And Chip, who were you supporting from at the beginning of the primary season?
John Kasich.
You were a John Kasich person. And I was a Ted Cruz person myself, and I want to start with you, Chip. How did Kasich appeal to you? What was Kasich's appeal for you?
Well, Kasich, if you look at the resumes of people on both sides in presidential candidates, Kasich had by far the most impressive resume. I mean, he had been a congressman for 5 or 6 terms. He produced a balanced budget as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee during the Clinton administration, the last time we had a surplus. And then he became the governor of Ohio. I think he was in his second or third term when he ran. He did a good job then, plus he'd been a commentator on Fox News. He was very articulate. So all those things come together, and I said, Kasich, I think, has got the most solid resume. And unfortunately, he was also probably one of the most boring people that would ever speak. To give you an example, when Kasich got up to lecture, empty chairs got up and left the room. All right? That's unfortunately how boring the guy was. You started looking forward to dental appointments in the middle of his speeches, you know.
Okay, I'm going to jump over to Chris. Now, you said you were with Trump from the start. Why did you decide on Trump from the start?
It was his speech when he came down the escalator. It really was. It was something that, perfect showmanship, perfect Trump, right up the alley of how he does things. And his initial speech not only grabbed me, but the fact that he was just so raw in the speech elicited to me that this is somebody who isn't going to F around, not during his campaign or even when he gets into the office. This is a guy who's going to tell it like it is. And I was having a conversation earlier about transparency. A good friend of mine, Pete Bove, out here. I was having a conversation about transparency. This is a guy who's completely transparent. Never mind his Twitter feeds. As much as you hate them, I want more of them. Okay? I want more of them because that's part of the transparency. This is a guy who gets on in front of the camera, tells it like it is, doesn't use a teleprompter, goes completely off script. And as much as some of us might grind at that, I got news for you. This is the most transparent because he's telling it exactly like it is. And somebody had said here, he's saying the things that we're already thinking anyway.
All right, it's interesting that you mentioned the escalator speech because I remember watching it and I wrote about it and I was watching everybody make fun of it. All the elites, and including conservative elites, and I listened to it and I heard what you heard, even though I said I was a Ted Cruz guy, that his audience wasn't the media, his audience was the voters, and I realized that something was going on here. Now, I'd like to go over to you. You said you're a Scott Walker person. I want to ask you two things. First, why Scott Walker? Because Walker was third on my list behind Cruz was number one and Santorum was number two for me. Why were you for Walker? And I'd like to know what you thought of the Trump escalator speech when he announced.
Well, one of the reasons that I liked Scott Walker was one of the same reasons that you liked John Kasich, was that Scott Walker is also boring. He may not have been as boring as John Kasich, but he was boring. And that was appealing to me after 8 years of Obama. And but one of the other reasons that I liked Scott Walker was because I felt that he had really proved himself as somebody who knew how to win. This was a governor who won an election, then actually had to fight and win again in a recall election. He also stood off against an army of social justice warriors who invaded Wisconsin state capitol with drums and noisemakers and everything else you can think of.
$1 million worth of damage.
Yeah, and exactly. And so he faced off against that, and he just kept winning. And I felt that if he could take that same ability to win to the general election, then he'd be great. I also find Scott Walker appealing. I tend to lean libertarian, and Scott Walker is essentially a libertarian Republican.
And what did you think of the Trump escalator speech?
To tell you the truth, I didn't see it when it happened. I was probably writing something at the time. Since then, I've caught bits and pieces of it on YouTube, and I know sort of the
So you wouldn't have had an initial impression?
No.
Okay, so that's fair enough. Now, Diane, I want
I
to...
actually want to, let me chime in.
Before you chime in, I do want to give Diane her shot first.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, Diane, you were with the Trump campaign. I'd like to know when you joined the Trump campaign, and when did you settle on Donald Trump as your primary candidate?
So this is funny because Bonnie, she's the person I reached out to start volunteering for Donald Trump. It's kind of ironic. But when I was living in Cambridge, when that's a
Cambridge for Trump.
whole other story. But so I was living in Cambridge, and I had a little TV show, and my guest on the show said that Donald Trump had announced that he was going to run for president, and it's up there on YouTube. I think it was June or something, and I laughed because I thought it was a joke, and I thought, nothing will come of it. But living in Cambridge, I lived one street over from the Marathon Bombers, and that changed. It changed. I went from somebody who was not active in politics or local events to somebody who has now dedicated my life to being active and trying to save Massachusetts and America. And after that happened, I started to read a lot about what was going on in Europe, and then I decided that Donald Trump was the only person that could.
Why did you think Trump was the only person who could do this?
To be frank, and I talk a lot about political Islam and Sharia, but the word that Donald Trump used that nobody else had used was the word Muslim. And because saying that word causes people to get all nervous, and people think that you're a racist. But the fact that he was brave enough to say that, I thought he is the only person who can help our country.
Okay, Chip, you had something you wanted to say. I'll let you chime in before I get to the next question. Oh, Chris, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. One of the other things that I had watched also, not only did I watch the Trump speech live when it happened, I also watched the Ted Cruz speech live when it happened, when he did it at, I think it was Liberty University, the Christian college there. He did it in the round. Another fantastic speech. Again, spelling it out, not being afraid of his Christian conservative values. And say what you want about Ted Cruz, about how he votes in the Congress, the Senate, that's fine. That's fine. Everyone has to make compromises. What I'm talking about is what happened on both of those days at both of those speeches. The left immediately went on the rampage, immediately started taking that 10-second bit, that 5-second bit, that one-liner, that one sentence, and tried to twist it. And almost instantaneously, I started seeing exactly what we were in for. We were in for one hell of a race. We were in for one hell of a propaganda game that was going to be fomented upon the American people. And if you remember, go back in the Rolodex in your heads, remember what happened in 2016. Anything Trump said, anything Cruz said, anything any of the 17 Republicans up on that stage said was circumspect. It always was. No matter what the speeches were, no matter what they said at the debates, it wasn't the context of what they were saying. It was that little 10-second sentence. And that became the aggrandizement of the left. And whether you voted for Ted Cruz, some people were for Kasich. What's that famous saying during the debates? I forget who the candidate was, but they looked out and they said, any 17 of us would be better than Hillary Clinton.
All right, now, it's interesting. Go ahead, Mike.
I just want to make a quick comment in response to what you just said. Regarding the 17 Republican candidates during the 2016 Republican primary. If everybody remembers, Democrats and all of their allies in the media had a great time making fun of the fact that there were 17 Republican candidates.
Right.
Is everybody looking forward to the 500 people who are going to run for president on the Democrat side? There is no debate hall which is going to be big enough for the number of Democrats who are going to try to challenge Trump in 2020.
All right, now, USA Today, and Chip, I'm going to direct this to you first because you've spoken the least. USA Today had their report card on Trump, and the first person who wrote was Glenn Reynolds of Instapundit, and he gave Trump an A+ for not being Hillary Clinton. And that is the reason why I voted. As he put it, that is the reason why he voted for Trump, and he remains even less Hillary Clinton than he was elected. And a lot of us I remember when Trump got the nomination, it took me about a week or two to decide, do I want to get on board Donald Trump? And for myself, it wasn't until Father Frank Pavone assured us of his pro-life credentials, which he has been spiking the ball on that issue. When Inauguration Day came, and Trump had won, beating everybody's expectations, when that happened, what were your expectations of the Trump presidency?
Well, I remember watching it with a whole bunch of friends, and we were cheering about every third sentence. He was laying out exactly what he said he was going to do, and it wasn't one of these airy pie in the sky type things. He talked in common language and said, "I'm now your president. I'm going to do bing, 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 bing," and with the common man. And here's a billionaire talking like the common man, and I think that resonated with a lot of people.
Well, what did you expect, though?
About what he did. You know,
Really?
I thought he was fairly decent as a speaker. I mean, he was no Demosthenes or anything, but he was pretty good. I like to also point out one other thing, and this is actually, and it proves one of the reasons Trump won. There's a liberal left-wing talk show host on Channel 2 named Jim Browdy. Layman liberal, you probably all know him. I know him well because I battled him over the years on ballot questions. Pretty decent guy for a liberal, I have to admit. But he's a human being and all that. But he came out with a line several months ago when he was talking about Trump, and he said, you know, I was a Hillary supporter, I voted for her, but in some ways when you look at Trump, you just had to agree with the guy. The guy's genuine. And he pointed out that during one of the primaries, Trump got up to speak the night before, and I forget where it was, Nebraska, Ohio, somewhere. And he says, I want everyone to come out tomorrow and vote, but only if you're voting for me. And he says, if you're not going to vote for me, stay home. And even Brody had to appreciate that, because no other politician would say that. You know they were thinking it. Yeah, come out and vote, and by the way, I hope you, but he said it. As I pointed
Now,
out.
Diane, obviously you were with the Trump campaign. You were in Washington the day of the inauguration. What did you expect to see from Donald Trump on that day? Did you expect, first of all, did you expect him to achieve the things he's achieved or failed to achieve? And did you expect the media vitriol that started 2 days after the election to be nonstop? I mean, I was actually shocked to see it continually going on, as if people expected him not to be inaugurated.
So the first question is the day of the inauguration? I think
What
you
did
have three questions.
what were you expecting?
I think I didn't have any real expectations of that day, because this was the first time that I was really that involved in a presidential campaign. So I didn't have any expectations, but I remember we were watching the inauguration. We were in DC, but we were at the Capitol Hill Club, so we weren't on the mall. And I remember crying because I just thought, this is just, you know, this is historic. This is amazing that we worked so hard and we got him to where he was, and everybody had said, you know, they were all naysayers. So I didn't have any expectations at that time, but I think in the last year, I marvel at what he has pulled off. And there are a lot of things that he's done that I'm sure we'll get to, that many people aren't aware of, the things that he has done that will change our future, our kids' future, our grandkids' future. So, yes.
I'll take it. I got something. Pete's a little busy here. You need to understand a simple axiom that was in play in 2016, and that is we elected just some guy. And what do I mean by that? I've said it several times on my show, and many people have said, well, what are you talking about? Think about it. Strip away his billions, strip away who Donald Trump is or was. Think about it. We just elected some guy. Never elected to office, never served in the military, wasn't a senator, wasn't a governor, wasn't this, wasn't that. He was just some guy. And he captured the popularity of the country. We haven't seen this since Jackson. This is why Jackson is hanging behind the Resolute desk in his office. And of course, we can go into Jackson and his history, but that's a separate show for another day. But Jackson was the same thing. He was a populist president, quite literally elected by the people. And never mind the fact that we can claim that Hillary won the popular vote. Doesn't matter. What happened over the past several years, again, I trace this through my show and my association with the Worcester Tea Party. Since 2010, cities, counties, states, their delegations, their electors have all gone Republican, which is why when the Electoral College vote came down, it was a runaway, and people didn't understand this. How is he winning? Hang on. How is he winning? It's like because people don't understand their political history. You know, you've been on the Republican committees. You know that over the past several years, many cities and towns across this country have turned red. This is how he was able to win the Electoral College.
It's also worth mentioning that people talk about the popular vote, but President Trump won the popular vote in 29 states, was it? So there were...
Out of 38, I think there's 3,800 and plus or minus counties in the United States. Donald Trump won well over 3,000 of them. I think it's like 3,049, some odd number like that.
Yeah, you take California out of it, and he wins the entire country by 3 or 4 million.
Yeah, California is a big difference. It's sort of like the 1960 World Series when the Yankees won each win by 10 runs, but the Pirates won 4 games to 3. Now, I want to go back to Mike. Now, obviously, if you had to name Trump's accomplishments, there are several that we could talk about, but what is the thing, I'm going to ask all of you this before we start to get to some of the questions that are in my pocket. What are the things that you were most pleased to see come from the Trump administration, and what's the thing that disappointed you? That you either that he did that you didn't like, or that he didn't do that you wanted him to do? We'll start with you.
Well, I'll start with, let me start with the negative, because that's quick. I've become so desensitized by the media's nonstop 24/7 criticism that whenever something comes up that's supposed to be a negative of Trump, I almost automatically dismiss it. So that's to answer your question, what I'm disappointed about.
Now, before you go
Nothing.
on, I want to ask this, because this is something that I've heard from a lot of people, that it's reached the point where when people start to criticize Trump, they just tune out because every moment there's been this. Has that been true for the rest of you?
Yeah, I tune it out. Sure. Anything
Chip?
negative, yeah.
Chip, have you reached that point?
Yeah, just dismiss it.
Diane?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So, I mean, all of us have reached that point, at least all of us up here. And I want to expand on that. I know you're going to name the thing that he did that you like, but does the media understand
No.
that they're doing this?
No, they have no idea. They have given up all pretense of objectivity. Not that they ever had any, but they're not even trying to hide it anymore. And they have no idea that majority of Americans have completely tuned them out. That how ridiculous they look by jumping up and down